On November 11th, 2011, the fifth installment of Bethesda's The Elder Scrolls video game franchise, titled Skyrim, was finally released, and it became an immediate success. So much so that Mr. Howard here, hi Mr. Howard,
degenerates,
looked at it, took a deep breath, and said, "Let's do it again!" And so they did it again, and again, and again, and again. I mean, it's basically the same game. So now we have Skyrim on every platform imaginable. PC, 3 generations of PlayStation and Xbox, Nintendo Switch, tabletop, Alexa, the Sony water bottle, you name it. With over 30 million combined sales, it has undeniably become a classic and one of the most successful games ever released, and one of my personal favorites of all time. A while back, on November 11th, 2021, Skyrim celebrated its 10th anniversary by completely ruining everyone's mod builds with a shitty anniversary update. And yet, for whatever reason, the game and the community still refuse to die, as tens of thousands of people every day just can't seem to quit. Like, seriously, move on, it's been 10 fucking years! A feat almost unachievable for a game of this age. But how does Ancient Paper Rolls 5 manage to stay relevant and playable with all the cyberpunks and Ghosts of Tsushima coming out? Today, I'm going to try and answer that question and figure out what it is that makes Skyrim so special. Let's start with the basics. What is Skyrim? Skyrim is a plot by Todd Howard to re-release the same product over and over until the end of humanity. From a gameplay perspective, it's a fantasy role-playing game with a heavy emphasis on open-world exploration. If you look very closely, you may notice that the words I've highlighted on screen actually match the title of this section of the video, which is a completely irrelevant fact that I felt like pointing out. Now, open worlds aren't anything new in video games. Your dad might remember 1980s games such as The Legend of Zelda or Highlight. The debut game of the Elder Scrolls series, released in 1994, wasn't short of exploration either, so the concept of an open environment isn't new to the series at all. Nowadays, the presence of an open world is very common in AAA projects. Games like The Witcher 3, Cyberpunk, Assassin's Creed, even notoriously linear franchises like Final fucking Fantasy now come equipped with open worlds of their own. So how is Skyrim any different? It's time to use our wild imagination. Never mind. Let's pretend for a few minutes that through some Russian guy magic, every open world RPG out there suddenly lost its main quest. That's right, gone, reduced to bytes. And just to make the nightmare we've created even more extreme, let's also remove every means of fast travel from said games. No teleportation, no vehicles, no Season 2. So now the games have devolved to an open landscape with a bunch of side quests here and there. If that were to happen to any other game out there that wasn't made by Bethesda, I guarantee you'd be bored out of your mind. Let's use The Witcher 3 as an example. The game is widely considered the game of the decade or even the best game of all time, so it must be pretty good, right? Let's try to apply these limitations we just came up with to it. The first thing we'll notice is, well, the lack of a meaningful story, which is a pretty big part of the game. Unlike Skyrim, where it almost feels like a side quest to Cheese Wheel Collection. But that alone doesn't necessarily break the game on its own. The side quests are decent enough, but as soon as we start walking between quest targets, problems start to arise. There's simply nothing to do in between quests. Sure, you can gather some materials, slay some generic wolves here and there, the combat is fun enough I suppose, and you could stare at some nice views, but all in all, that feels more like a chore or pointless grinding rather than exploration. Couple that with the fact that Witcher's world is about 3 times as large as Skyrim's, so the density of the content is even more scarce, we get a world that is essentially a side quest hub with very little in between. These issues are even more apparent in CDPR's latest game, Cyberpunk 2077, which already receives a lot of criticism, though not for the reasons I think it should. The world is filled with doors you can't open, buildings you can't enter, empty shell NPCs, and most importantly, very few meaningful quests. From my experience playing it, I've encountered dozens upon dozens of the same run-in, shoot, get out type of gig, while the number of real quests was approximately 4. In the end, the only meaningful choices you get are in the main story, which we removed from the game, so we don't even get to see Keanu. Keep in mind that I'm only using these examples because they're supposed to be some of the best of the bunch. Arguably. If we look at more linear games that feature an open world, such as Nier Automata or Final Fantasy XV, these downsides become even more apparent. Those games would become voids filled with nothing but grinding, were we to somehow remove the main story from them. Now, I'm not saying these are bad games by any means. I thoroughly enjoyed both of them a lot, and Nier Automata specifically, along with Skyrim, are my two favorite games of all time. I also don't think making a game linear is as much of a crime as everyone makes it out to be. I'm probably one of the 13 people on planet Earth who really liked Final Fantasy 13 despite its linear hallway level design, because when the only relevant part of the game is the main story, then walking in a straight line to experience it kinda makes sense. But that reinforces my point even further. Why bother making an open world in your game if you're not even gonna use it to its full potential? Or how much criticism Bethesda's been receiving lately, completely valid by the way, when it comes to creating worlds, they fucking nail it every time. Almost. Open worlds have almost become a requirement for any modern AAA title, yet almost every time it's just a hub for filler content that doesn't add anything meaningful to the game, and the only purpose of their existence is to extend your playtime. Now let's go back to Skyrim. What happens when we remove the main quest from the game? Well, to be honest, not much. We've all seen the memes about people playing the game for 800 hours and not even touching the main story, and well, it's almost not a joke. Yes, losing the whole plot about dragons and Sovngarde and Ulfric Stormcloak's crotch would be a pretty big hit, but unlike other games, no one gives a shit. The point of the game is in everything else. Some of the main side quest chains like the Dark Brotherhood or the Thieves Guild are arguably as good, if not better, than Dovahkiin's Bizarre Adventure. The lack of fast travel wouldn't hurt much either. In fact, I think that's the optimal way of playing the game, as that's the way I've been playing for the last couple of years, and I'm having a blast. Every corner, every nook and cranny of Skyrim has something to do. You could start walking towards your quest target, get distracted by a dungeon or a cave or a random encounter with a lizard person, escape some angry trolls, find a whole other side quest on the way, and completely forget what you were doing in the first place. Truth is, you could be anywhere in Skyrim at any point in time, start going in any direction, and there would be content. At worst, you would discover a basic cave with a single bear whose sleep you rudely interrupted. Asshole. Or a generic bandit hideout with a randomly generated third elven warhammer in a row. But more often than not, you find a well-written location with a nice story that you can discover through written notes, or even a fully fledged side quest about some local conflict or ancient mystery. That is the magic and beauty of Skyrim. Full of things to do, NPCs to meet, and quests to complete. It truly feels like an open world, not an open space. If 1,000 words of mercilessly shitting on Polish middle-class employees of CD Projekt Red weren't enough to convince you to forfeit all your material possessions for the greater good of Todd, allow me to continue by ridiculously overhyping Skyrim's perk system. It consists of a vast variety of skill trees, each dedicated to one specific action, like swinging swords or scorching children. They can be divided into 3 main classes: the warrior, the wizard, and and the sneaky dude. The melee trees include one-handed, two-handed, smithing, heavy armor, block, you get the idea. Anything to turn you into a generic, boring, bulky, melee warrior person. Magic includes destruction, restoration, illusion, alteration, enchanting. All excellent tools to fulfill your childhood dream of becoming Luke Skywalker or something. Sorry, I didn't watch Lord of the Rings. And stealth includes sneak, archery, light armor. So you can create the same sneaky assassin for the 16th playthrough in a row. Each perk tree has approximately a metric fuckton of different words to spend your hard-earned perk points on, allowing you to try a variety of different builds, the number of which goes up to at least 2. You could be a stealth archer with a dagger, a stealth archer with a big ass sword, a stealth archer wizard, a punching cat, all of the above. Step aside, mortals! My block has been maxed out 4 times! Despite this system's numerous imperfections, it allows you to mix and match enough perks and skill trees to want to keep littering your computer with Todd's save files until you run out of space, all because you wanted to adjust your build by 2 perks. Couple that with the fact that a thorough playthrough takes about 3 lifetimes to complete, you can be sure that you and your grandchildren will be sufficiently entertained. Allow me to once again shamelessly and 100% objectively bash other games that I've definitely thoroughly researched to prove my correct and unbiased opinion. Witcher 3, Swordsman, Swordsman with spells, Swordsman with potions. Assassin's Creed, I mean come on, it's in the name. Dark Souls, Swordsman, Swordsman, Naked Swordsman, Swordsman with a gun. Cyberpunk, gun, hacker gun, Mantis Blades, okay that's actually kinda cool. You get the point. Unlike most other similar games, there is realistically more than one archetype that you can play. You get to choose between 3 main classes, all of which are different enough to make you want to come back to the game, and which you can mix and match however you want, creating a truly unique playstyle. And no matter what abomination you create, it's going to be playable because the game just works. If you're still somehow not convinced that Skyrim is the greatest game in the solar system, well, we're just getting started. Skyrim's mods are pretty famous, or rather infamous in the gaming community, for their ridiculousness and other reasons. I'm sure you've all seen at least one video of people ruining their game by turning dragons into Thomas the Tank Engine, 10 of them each. For some reason, it's usually the funny mods that steal the spotlight, but today I would like to enlighten you on the products of secret underground masterminds, who for the last 10 years have done nothing but add DLC quality content that frankly should have been in the game from the start. Did I mention that they're all completely free? Even though the existence of Skyrim's mods is common knowledge at this point, I don't think people fully realize the scope and level of dedication of this Todd-forsaken community. If we compare the total number of mods ever released for Skyrim to other games, the only comparable product will be Minecraft, both totaling at nearly 100,000 mods. Consider the fact that Minecraft has actually sold about, 10 times more copies? So essentially, Skyrim's modders managed to keep up with their Minecraft counterparts while only having about 10% of their player base. These people are nuts, man. Honey, it's time for dinner! Shut up, woman, I need to finish my XPM SSE 1080p 60 FPS 1337 kilobytes per second maximum compatibility skeleton with boop physics. And honestly, it's not that surprising. Skyrim's modding community was preceded by Bethesda's older games, namely Oblivion, Morrowind, Fallout 3 and New Vegas, which all ran on the same decade-old creation engine, and it looks like the next Elder Scrolls game will also be running on it. There's no way that would go wrong. So basically, the community had 9 years of experience on Spawn. Both the development and installation processes have been oiled to perfection. We've evolved from the good old copy and paste to having advanced mod loaders that allow you to install nearly every mod with a single click, while dual wielding separate builds, all while having 4 different games run through it without even affecting your files. Such a vast array of mods accumulated over the years allows for nearly limitless customizability. Anything you can think of, there's probably a mod for that. Wanna be a hot, spiky-haired anime character? There's plenty of mods for that. Wanna turn your game into literal Dark Souls? There's mods for that. Want nudes? That's literally every other mod. Why is this a thing? So even if you exhaust base Skyrim's hundreds of hours worth of exploration and questing with its already insane replayability, you also get a constant stream of essentially free DLCs, so many of them that you can turn your Skyrim into a completely different game if you wanted to. Skyrim is not a perfect game, but you can make it perfect.
If I lose it all, slip and fall, I will never look away. If I lose it all, lose it all, lose it all.
If you've been paying any attention to this background footage, you might have possibly, maybe, perhaps, noticed that the gameplay you're watching looks a bit unusual. You might even take a wild guess and say that the game's been modified. And shockingly, you would be correct. So you might have come to a logical conclusion that I'm a pretty big modding enthusiast. So for this special occasion, I decided to run a little experiment. To show you guys how insane these madmen are even after all these years, we are going to make a new build. But there's a twist. I will only be using mods that came out this decade, 2020 onwards only. Out of 10 years of Skyrim's modding history, I will only be using 2. Let's see how it goes. Now I did cheat a little bit by making a few exceptions for certain framework mods such as Skyrim Script Extender or SkyUI, ones that have been around forever and which are required by like 90% of all mods, so wouldn't be much of a build without them. So I decided to add another rule which reads, if multiple mods that did qualify all required a certain older mod, I would still use it. Okay, shut up! Onto the mods! Here's a rundown of the whole process. I opened up my trusty mod organizer 2, as well as the Skyrim Special Edition Nexus. After installing all the essentials such as Skyrim Script Extender, SkyUI, race menu, bunch of fucking libraries, I don't know what they do, sorry, I now had a foundation ready. Then I started my standard modding procedure, which is Step 1. Open the mod categories on Nexus. Step 2. Click on a category. Step 3. Filter by release date. Step 4. Browse through the first few pages and install anything that piques my interest. Repeat until satisfied. This is the part where I was gonna go over some notable mods in the build, but I'm lazy, so I'll just put the full list in the description, I guess. After a couple hours of browsing, I ended up with a grand total of nice. Time to start a new playthrough. Right from the very start, we notice our iconic card companions looking a bit different. Eventually, me and the boys make it to hell.
This is hell. I used to be a girl from here.
After speedrunning the character creation screen in just a few hours and making it through the tutorial in long and painful 5 minutes, me and my new friend Rayloff were finally free. While we're outside, I'd like to take a moment to appreciate the drastic improvement to the environment, which looks a bit like burnt gunpowder in the original. As we make our way to Riverwood, we get ambushed by a bunch of dumb wolves, which is a perfect opportunity to highlight a few more mods. First of all, the camera no longer looks like it was made in 2006 and actually moves around smoothly, you know, like in a real video game. The combat is also completely 360 full circle instead of the vanilla forward only mode. There's also a camera lock feature, general procedural leaning, and even a dodge key. And just to keep things more interesting, I added some new animations across the board. You know, for how much I shit on The Witcher 3, I sure turned my game into The Witcher 3. As you can see, with just a few very simple yet groundbreaking mods, we are able to drastically modernize the game's combat while barely changing anything about the core gameplay. While we're on our way to Whiterun, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to today's sponsor. For this playthrough, I decided to focus mainly on the main story as much as possible, which I haven't done in a very long time. I will also try to avoid fast traveling for reasons, and hopefully I'll be able to highlight some mods along the way. Eventually I get greeted by Jarl Balin himself, though I'm not paying him any mind because Irileth is breathing hot air in my face. I don't mind though. I proceed to turn on Bethesda's survival mode, only to turn it off 30 minutes later because it's less stable than my 200 mod build. So I went to a cave to grab a stone, got shouted at by a wall, killed a dead guy, that's awkward, went back, killed a dragon, climbed a mountain, went into another cave, killed another dragon. It was around this point that I actually remembered that I installed a paraglider mod. So I decided to take a detour to go and get it. After another long and painful mountain climb, I finally found it. Picked it up, jumped off the edge, and it didn't work. After about 2 hours of unsuccessful troubleshooting and repeatedly plunging my character to her demise, I gave up and deleted the mod. I did maintain the 69 counter, but I forgot what I installed as a replacement. Please subscribe. With my glider quest being unsuccessful, it was time to pick up the pace. I sprinted right back down to Riverwood to discuss the next step with Karen. The plan would be to sneak into the Thalmor embassy and steal some intel, and this guy named Malborn will help me smuggle some equipment in.
Give me what you can't live without, and I'll make sure to get it into the embassy.
You can't go to a party at the Thalmor embassy dressed like that.
Like I give a shit. After politely asking a fellow Red Guard American to cause a distraction, I successfully sneak away from the party, mercilessly murder a dozen elves, and run away with the loot. Except I don't, because I get distracted once again. This time I got curious. Where does Melbourne go after escaping the embassy with us? I decided that it was absolutely essential to find out. So I tailed him for a while, until I got distracted yet again and lost him. Then somehow found him again and followed him to his death at a random bandit hideout. Fine, keep your secrets. Then I decided to spice things up a bit and intentionally ruined the next 2 hours of footage so that it was simply some audio on a black screen. Clearly, I only did this because the video was getting boring and not because I'm an idiot who doesn't know how to record. Thankfully, nothing of note really happened. I was mostly running from point A to point B while going along with the story. First I went to Riften, found Grandpa Musley in the sewers, brought him back to Delphine. They had a touching reunion. Then we all went to some ancient temple to stare at a wall, which told us of the cheat code shout required to defeat Alduin. Had a fruitful conversation with a friendly dragon, which went something like, "Hello, how shout? I don't know bro, go get an Elder Scroll or something, XD. Okay, where? I don't know, Google it." So Google it I did, and after properly playing through the quest without skipping any parts of the story or using any bugs, I found myself in the chamber containing the title of the game. Only to realize that I needed a Minecraft diamond block to get it, so using the ancient library of forbidden knowledge yet again, I went and got it, without dealing with the Mages Guild's bullshit. I once again struggled desperately not to play through the game's longest and most annoying dungeon, successfully enter, push some buttons brainlessly, and finally get my hands on the Elder Scroll. I climbed the mountain yet again, this time actually using fast travel because I hate this goddamn mountain and I'm tired of climbing it every 10 fucking minutes. Learn the cheat code that will help me murder Alduin to death through some time travel mechanics, defeat Alduin first try, go back down, politely ask Jarl Balgruuf to trap a live dragon in his city, which he logically agreed to immediately and didn't make me assemble a peace council with Skyrim's biggest crybabies. Trap the dragon, come to an agreement with it, ride it to the final dungeon, swiftly progress through it using the secret Joestar technique, and enter the land of the dead. If you couldn't tell by my rushed narration, I was getting pretty bored of this playthrough, but upon entering Sovngarde and being greeted by a dreadful sight of Alduin consuming souls of the honored dead, surprisingly, my mood was changed in an instant. Not by the bad dragon consuming innocent lost souls, although that does qualify as a serious war crime I would say, but by the soundtrack. which is another point I'd like to briefly mention while my character is making her way through the fog. While Skyrim's soundtrack may not be considered the greatest of all time, nor does it push the envelope of video game music like the Doom or Nier franchises, it more than gets the job done. And while Jeremy Soul's work probably won't find itself listened to on repeat in thousands of people's headphones, the way it sets the mood of the location is fascinating. And I believe there is no better example than the appropriately named Sovngarde's theme. It really makes you feel like an Elder Scroll. But I digress. At the edge of the fog, I'm greeted by an upscale guy who immediately challenges me to a duel, after which I make my way to the Hall of Frame Rate, where I meet up with the boys and Gormlaith, go back outside, shout at the air a bunch of times, and finally, joined by the ancient heroes of Skyrim, we manage to defeat Alduin for good this time. As much as I hate to admit it, this playthrough was pretty boring, and it's not as surprising as it might sound. First of all, I decided to focus on the main story for once, which, as you might know with any Bethesda game, is a huge mistake. In fact, some of the most memorable moments throughout this run were times where I just did random shit, like chasing a wood elf half across Skyrim. And even though I promised myself to only do the main quest, I couldn't help but wander off every now and then, even when the game didn't want me to. Despite all that, and despite memorizing the entirety of the story at this point with the number of times I've played it throughout the years, the ending is still as breathtaking as it was 10 years ago. I sadly wasn't able to pimp my load order with all-time classics such as Static Mesh Improvement mod, which is pretty much essential for any sort of next-gen 300 mod Challenger My Wife Divorced Me build, or Ordinator, which pushes the build diversity I talked so much about to a whole new level and is possibly my favorite mod of all time. In fact, I was so used to having it installed that I was caught a bit off guard the first time I opened the skill tab by just how simple the vanilla/slightly modded trees are in comparison. Nevertheless, the build turned out very solid with some truly groundbreaking mods, especially ones that worked, like Combat Gameplay Overhaul, True 360 Combat, or Smooth Cam. And I even found a couple new files to add to my main build while making this one. And I only picked from about 20% of the ocean of available mods accumulated online over Skyrim's long lifespan. Despite all of its flaws, like game-breaking bugs, mediocre story quests, at least compared to other hit RPGs, Bethesda's scummy moves like the creation of the Creation Club, which realistically only serves as a source of modpocalypse every update, and every product in it can be easily replaced with a mod that is free and most likely better. I still, after all these years, love Skyrim. No other single-player game came even close to its longevity and immersion, and no matter how many hip and cool new releases come out, it still remains my go-to escape from reality that I just can't seem to let go. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you guys for watching. I really poured my heart and soul into this one, what's left of them anyway. Before you go, I wanted to briefly apologize for, not uploading. I've pinned a comment sort of explaining what I've been up to the past few months, as well as my current plans, so hopefully those will come to fruition in the foreseeable future and not next year again. But for now, see ya!